Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, Large Scale Renewables, the next chapter in higher education sustainability leadership. Thank you for joining Second Nature and CustomerFirst Renewables for our event. My name is Michelle Medea, Director of Education and Partnerships with Second Nature, and we're delighted to have you with us today, broadcasting from the snowy East Coast. Just a quick word of thanks to CustomerFirst and all of our corporate partners for their ongoing support of Second Nature and the Climate Leadership Network. A few housekeeping details before we begin. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording and the slides will be sent to all registrants in the days following the webinar. We'll save some time at the end for a Q&A session, and you can submit questions at any time throughout the broadcast using the questions function on your GoToWebinar panel. We'll be joined by two presenters today. Gary Farha is President and CEO of CustomerFirst Renewables, a leading renewable energy advisory services firm focused on establishing competitively and predictably priced utility-scale solutions tailored to large businesses and institutions. Prior to founding CFR in 2010, Gary was a senior partner in McKinsey & Company, where he served energy and industrial clients and co-led the firm's global innovation practice. But first, we'll hear from Tim Carter, President of Second Nature. Prior to coming to Second Nature a little over 2 years ago, Tim was the founding director of Butler University's Center for Urban Ecology, and he's always cheering for them right around the corner at March Madness. Tim also served as a faculty member at the University of Georgia, where he received his PhD in ecology. So I'll turn it over to Tim, and thank you all again for joining us today.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm going to quickly give some national and organizational context to this webinar, and then just turn it over to Gary to get into the meat of the content about large-scale renewable energy. But I think it is really important to set the context here, particularly in light of our recent transition at the federal level. So next slide. You know, in this era of alternative facts, it's important to remind ourselves that the science and the laws of physics don't really care what the headlines are. And so this graph is really just showing this clear alignment between modeled climate data and observed climate data. This is from the National Climate Assessment. What you see is that when you just take natural factors into account, you don't have an alignment with the actual data that we see. You actually need to take natural and human factors, so we are a major cause of this change, the change that we're seeing. Next slide. In the simplest form, you might have seen this tweet recently. This is from Ed Maibach. He said, the best summary is these 5 points. Climate change is real. It's us. Experts agree. It's bad. And there's hope. So I think all 5 of those things are actually relevant whenever we think about both why we're doing this, but then in terms of what solutions are out there. And I think that perspective is helpful to have. And if you need a succinct way of describing it to people, those are 5 points. Next slide. And many other people, you can change the slide. Are we still going here? There we go. Many other people besides the experts, the scientists actually agree. In the past couple of years, we've had the religious community weigh in on this. Many of you might be familiar with the papal encyclical that was, I think it was in 2014 when that came out, but there was significant response from different religious communities to even the leadership of the Pope. So important to know that it's not just scientists talking about this. Go ahead and change the slide. We've actually had international agreement as well. The Paris Agreement, which many of you probably heard about in the end of 2015, has now been implemented. It took, months into 2016 before this was actually ratified and begun enacted. So at the international level, there's significant agreement. Around the same time, the Breakthrough Energy Coalition was established. This is a group of business leaders who also said, we need to invest in different forms of energy at the very early stages. Again, getting off the ground right now. These are emerging and new contextual themes in society. Next slide. But I think the real elephant in the room is what will happen to climate leadership under this new Trump administration. And I think it's worth mentioning that there is a lot that's still unknown at this point. Things are becoming slightly clearer. Clearly the defunding in some ways of EPA is going to have a big impact on their policies and ability to implement some of the ongoing programs they have. That will likely result in the rolling back of some of the Clean Power Plan requirements once it gets out of the courts, and that will take a while. So as much as you like to, I was talking to somebody the other day who said, if you had a competent federal government, you would see, and you wanted to see something happen, it's very difficult for the federal government to do anything. And so if you have maybe not as competent a federal government, it's very difficult for them to even get things done badly if they want to change things. So while this might be a priority, rolling back the Clean Power Plan, and it seems to be for this administration, it's unlikely in the next year and a half that we'll see significant changes as it makes its way out of the courts and then probably back into the courts. So next slide. And even with, let's just assume for a second that Clean Power Plan doesn't get put into place, or it doesn't take place in the form that it was proposed under the Obama administration. You can see that different segments of the energy economy are really not going to spike anytime soon. So here's the EIA's projections of both coal production and coal consumption with and without the Clean Power Plan. So the darker line is with the plan and the lighter lines are without. So you can clearly there's a change, there's a difference, but there's not a huge massive increase in coal production or consumption under no Clean Power Plan scenarios. So we've really seen a shift in the way the market has responded to energy supply. And next slide. We're seeing this in a variety of areas, not just on the brown power side, but also on the renewable energy side or clean power side. So this is just an illustration of between 2005 and 2015. There was about 79 megawatts of solar in 2005. Each dot represents about 10 megawatts of solar. And this is just in the U.S. And in 2015, there was about 7,000 megawatts of solar in the U.S. So that trend was nothing that anyone was predicting. So it was very clearly something that is emergent and not something you can look back and say, oh, in the next 5 years we'll see 7,000 megawatts of solar. That just wasn't on people's radar. So we've seen explosive growth in the renewable energy sector. Next slide. And then, of course, we're seeing more innovation in the way the grid operates. And so in response, especially to climate hazards, there's more of these distributed types of energy systems that can function in response to those events. And so this is an NYU example where you see this massive blackout, but they are actually sustained by their microgrid right around lower Manhattan. Next slide. So the takeaway here about with the federal context is that, under the new administration, we're absolutely going to see changes. We don't think the changes will happen as rapidly as maybe we expect, and we definitely know the market has already spoken in terms of cost effectiveness and the ability of different types of energy systems to be benefiting all of society, not just, this isn't just an environmental issue. There's a lot of reasons why we're seeing a shift in new energy systems. So one consideration I think we should make is that if we really are focused on outcomes, rather than committed to orthodoxy or pitching orthodoxy, then we can really contribute and accelerate progress even in the short term under this new administration. So whether it's jobs and innovation in this case, so there's all the jobs are coming, significant number of jobs are coming in these building retrofit and energy efficiency sectors versus fossil fuel sectors. Next slide. Or protection against extreme weather events for farmers. You hear farmers talking about this in the Midwest. There's many, many common ways to discuss climate solutions without using climate, and that might be one thing to consider as we move into the era that we're finding ourselves in. So I was in Indianapolis for 5 years, as Michelle mentioned, and they have one of the largest electric vehicle fleets in the country, and the mayor of Indianapolis never talked about climate change. It was always about energy security. That's what she always heard. So there are ways to navigate this current situation that we find ourselves in a way that can still accelerate our progress. That's the takeaway here. So that's kind of the national context. Next slide. And last thing I wanted to mention is how Second Nature is really responding here. When we look at, here's like a conceptual landscape of higher education, and we know many of you on the call are really implementers. You know, you're ones that are actually at the bottom level here. You're highly networked with each other. We also, Second Nature, engage with presidents, senior leaders, and they're not really well connected. And so this leads to different functions depending on where you sit within the university. Next slide. We've recognized this difference, and so our support of the Climate Leadership Network really reflects this. It's represented here by this black triangle box. You know, the goal is not really in the Climate Leadership Network to serve all of higher education. It's a subset. It's a smaller group of institutions that actually have committed to really aggressive climate action. And so what we've done is provide access to resources and partners from outside the sector, and then we work directly with you as implementers to get your climate action plans done and things that are happening on your individual campus. We connect you to the president directly through this commitment, and then we try to connect presidents together at the senior leadership level. And then historically, we've actually gone even within the sector and trying to bring other people into the network. So there was this big recruitment effort. Next slide. After 10 years of the commitments now, we really know the network has been established. So we're positioned to think about growth through performance rather than growth through recruitment. And so our effort moving forward, you can see the icons changed a little bit of the size. From within higher ed, we're not really targeting recruitment as an effort. We're really focused on these 4 areas where the icon has changed. And I'm just going to go through these quickly before turning it over to Gary. Next slide. The first is to really connect presidents better together. And this happens at things like the Climate Leadership Summit, which we just had in Tempe, in-person convenings. There's also public-facing initiatives like state advocacy or local advocacy where presidents joining together can actually speak into issues that are relevant to the climate actions that happen on their campus. And then through shared leadership statements, like we just had a transition letter over the fall that went out to 800 congressional staffers, and all the presidents spoke into that together. I will say this is a challenge. It's a real challenge to think about how to connect presidents in an active way because they are so busy. They will have other priorities on their plate. This is something we're going to continue to explore in the years ahead. Next slide. The second area is to find more intentional ways to connect you as implementers with your senior leader, with your president. And this can happen through better communication about how your efforts are advancing your institutional goals, closer strategic alignment, which we've done in New England. We actually had an initiative where we aligned or looked at the strategic priorities of the university and see how well they aligned with the implementers' capacity. And then finding ways that presidential influence can actually help overcome some of the barriers you might currently be facing in meeting your goals. We recognize there can be a huge disconnect between implementation and the presidents. And so our role at Second Nature is really help bridge that for you as implementers. Next slide. Thirdly, we are going to focus on this better job, doing a better job of communicating externally outside of the sector into other domains, whether it's with cities, business community, other nonprofit organizations about the innovation and scaled action that's actually happening within the network. We do this already, but we think as a portal out, we'll be able to tell the story really well, and that will actually lead into the last one. You can go ahead and click on the next slide, which is somewhat most relevant to this webinar, which is how do we bring in external resources, external partners, maybe external technical assistance in order to help you as implementers and institutions meet the aggressive climate goals that you set for yourself. So we're focused on climate, and we're focused 100% on bringing resources that are going to serve the Climate Leadership Network best. So this can be in the form of funding or, like today, an introduction to some deeper technical assistance. So you can go ahead on the next slide. So just turning to the topic now at hand, we know that carbon commitment signatories, so this is people within the Climate Leadership Network that have a commitment to carbon neutrality. There's basically 3 areas of carbon emissions that people have to deal with. The first is energy efficiency and conservation. some of our most progressive campuses, we see up to 50 to 60% reduction in energy use from efficiency measures. So there's a lot to be done there. The second is fuel switching or scaled renewable energy. This is what we'll talk about later, and Gary will dig into. This is absolutely essential. It has to happen at some level, and at some point, you may not be at that point, but at some point, this has to happen if you're going to meet your neutrality goal. And the last bucket is this idea of carbon offsets or renewable energy certificates, or some ways purchasing externally some renewable energy on the market, and that doesn't necessarily have to be a static bucket. That actually can change, and some of our campuses have started with larger offset purchases, and then we'll shrink that over time. So this webinar is focused on that middle bucket. Last slide. The last thing I'll point out about that middle bucket is we know that it can't just happen at small scales. Many campuses, I think maybe 250 campuses within the network, just within the network, have some sort of renewable energy on their campus, whether it's a solar panel or a wind turbine or something. But to meet their goals, it has to happen at a large scale. And so one of the reasons we partnered with CustomerFirst is that they have some of the best experiences working with campuses to get these large scale projects done. This is one of the ones that they've done, the GW project. In particular, they're really skilled at large scale projects that involve more than one entity. And so if you think back to how do we accelerate progress, how do we have growth through progress, one of the things we want to do as a network is actually combine interinstitutional work in order to demonstrate that progress. And so these large-scale projects that aggregate demand actually have a lot of potential for meeting both your own individual campus's goals, but then also accelerating the goals of the network. So that's all from the contextual side. Hopefully that gives you a picture of the national context and then the organizational context where we want to go as kind of the foundation for why Second Nature is involved in a webinar like this. So I'll turn it over to Gary from CFR. He'll dig into the technical issues further. Gary, it's all yours.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. We're delighted to be here and look forward to sharing more insights around how to really make this opportunity happen within higher education. I'm going to be going through, next slide please, a few different topics. First, the opportunity with large-scale renewables. I'll then talk a little bit about the spectrum of options. We'll then talk about this very important notion of aggregation, where it's possible to get larger scale through working with others, both universities as well as just other organizations that may be within your relationship network or geographic location. And then lastly, we'll tee up some next steps and tools that on your own will help you further explore the large-scale renewable energy opportunity. Let me just add that during the course of my remarks, we'll actually be asking 3 real-time polling questions today, and we hope that everyone who's with us today will be able to respond, so stay tuned, and a prompt will come up as those questions come up a little bit later in my remarks. Next slide, please. Just very quickly, a little bit about us. We're a renewable energy advisory services firm. We only serve customers, as the name of our company would suggest. We're actually the first renewable energy focused advisory service firm in the market in the U.S. We were founded in 2010 by myself and another close friend and colleague of mine. Both of us had a lot of many years of experience serving the utility industry as well as the broader energy market, from suppliers all the way through to customers. And we recognized 2 really important macro trends were occurring about 8-9 years ago. One was that many organizations wanted to really get after their footprint in a much more meaningful way. Secondly, that renewable energy, and particularly large-scale renewables, were becoming much more economic. By kind of linking those 2 trends together, we recognize an opportunity to step in and help make the market happen in a way that really turned the tables with much more focus on the customer. Since that time, we've built a really powerful team. We have a lot of deep expertise, not only in renewables, but also across the whole energy landscape. Our team comes from a number of different venues, as you can see, and we bring to bear, serving every client, really 5 core capabilities that are needed to unlock the very best opportunities for the customer. You can see in the lower right-hand corner of this slide some of the different clients that we focus on. The top row, there's a number of different higher ed institutions there. We serve very actively a number of the major research universities across the country, and we're very proud about a number of the opportunities and projects that they've been able to bring to bear in the market. Next slide, please. The challenge that typically any organization, whether it's higher ed or a corporate or others, come to us and start talking about is that they've got a high ambition for what they'd like to do, and generally the bar keeps rising over time. Renewable energy targets get set higher, greenhouse gas goals, big focus on reducing them. And as you know, in the higher ed space, as part of the Second Nature network, probably almost everyone on the phone is actually a signatory, has made public commitments, and is very committed to getting after it. The challenge is that electricity is such a really important part of keeping any college or university going. As most of you probably know, having looked at your greenhouse gas footprint, it's probably 50% or more of your total footprint. So it's really a big deal. And interestingly, for many campuses, as technology becomes more and more prevalent in our lives, it's actually becoming more electricity intensive. And so that makes the challenge of tackling the goal, as the goal keeps increasing, a bigger and bigger deal. Of course, many of you already have many activities underway to address the greenhouse gas challenge on your campus. It's not just related to the source of energy, like on-site renewables, as Tim mentioned earlier, but many other things around energy efficiency, and possibly purchasing renewable energy credits or RECs, demand-side management, and so on. The challenge, of course, is that the electricity footprint is such a big part of your operations that generally on-campus solutions can only represent a very small portion of meeting your goals over time. Next slide, please. So what's been happening really over the last, as you can see, 8-9 years, is just a huge increase in end users, both higher ed as well as corporates. The federal government, DOD, and others have really been jumping into the game in a major way, as you can see. And particularly over the last 3-4 years, we've seen a massive uptake in customer-driven, large-scale renewable energy projects. If you're wondering what defines large-scale, typically there's no real rule here. Typically, we refer to it as 10 megawatts or larger of capacity. It can be different technologies. In this chart, the dark blue is wind projects. The lighter blue is solar projects. And they make up the 2 predominant sources of large-scale renewables that folks are going after. In the little box in the left-hand side of this chart, you can see higher ed has really been active in the game. Now, over the course of the last few years, 17 campuses are benefiting from large-scale solutions. A few of them on-site, where the college or university is blessed with a lot of land, but by far the large majority of them are off-site. Recognizing the desire to get the most economic solution possible requires going off campus, being connected to the grid, and accessing the benefits of the solution in that way. Next slide, please. The impact, we're happy to say, of renewables in the market has been staggering, not just driven by higher ed, but customers in general in the market, as well as utilities. What you can see on the left-hand side of this slide is that renewables are now the predominant source of new generation coming into the market. 62% of all new generation in 2016, 65% the year before, 50% in 2014. So, and if you're wondering why is this happening, a big part of it is actually driven by economics. And so when people talk to you about, renewables being a higher cost resource, you can look them in the eye and say, not only is it not a higher cost resource, in many and more increasing instances, it's actually at par or even below the cost of other new power generation. Next slide. So that turns us to our first polling question. This is something that we hope everyone with us today will be able to answer. A separate screen should come up on your screen that you can click on your answer, but the first question is, has your organization already explored on-site renewables? So I'll give you a minute to respond. Are we ready for to see the results? Well, it looks like folks definitely have their head in the game with respect to on-site renewables. We've got almost 50% for yes, you've explored in depth or looked at a little, and only 4% are just others who are not members of higher ed. So thank you for those votes, and let's move on to the next slide, please. So let me talk a little bit about the potential impact of large-scale renewable energy solutions if done well. Typically, most folks that we work with want to get very clear up front on what the value proposition is to their organization, potentially for both on-site and off-site large-scale solutions. And what we found is that it actually, there are 4 different elements. The first and very most important one for many is cost savings. The second, at 3 o'clock on the dial, is reduced future price risk. The third is reduced greenhouse gas footprint. And the fourth is other strategic benefits, which oftentimes are tailored to the individual institution. Let me actually dive in a little bit more deeply into each of these, starting first with cost savings. Next slide. So what we show here, and this is really focused on an off-site large-scale solution, is how cost savings are actually created. So if I could quickly just walk you through this waterfall on the left side of the chart, this just gives a sort of a granular view on where the savings come from. And as you can see, it starts with the solar power purchase agreement price. This is the agreed to price that you would enter into as a purchaser with the project developer, who, by the way, would be financing the project. So this assumes no capital outlay on the part of the college or university participating in the project. It would all be third-party financed by the developer. The next red block over is just other costs associated with integrating the solution with the transmission grid where it's physically located. The next gray bar over is the price of electricity that the renewable solution would receive from the market where it's physically located. And then the blue bar next to it are other revenues beyond the energy value of the solution, things like the capacity value of the solution, or in the case, for example, of a solar solution, since they generate power on peak, when market prices tend to be high, they have an even larger impact or benefits to the purchaser. When we net all this out, you can see there's an actual margin. This is for the year 1 margin of the solution, basically focused on the cost to the customer relative to the revenues received back from the market. And as you can see, a positive margin of $2.2 per megawatt hour, which then over on the right-hand side of this chart can get subtracted from the cost of power for the corporate or the university operations, which then leads to the net power cost that the customer sees. And so what this is suggesting is that even in year 1, in many of the solutions that we've been involved in with customers, they're actually seeing numbers that are accretive economically. They're positive cost savings from the get-go. And then as that gray bar back on the left side grows over time, just with market prices growing, that spread or margin also increases over time, and it provides a very natural offset to power prices that you continue paying locally to your supplier. Next slide. Turning to risk mitigation, this just shows then how that margin layered on top of the future electricity spread with the utility or whomever your local provider is, basically offsets in a very significant way how electricity spend would otherwise look over time, and creates a margin offset that grows as power prices increase. This, of course, is suggesting a very significant mitigation to your ongoing power costs, and therefore bringing much greater certainty to what for many colleges and universities is one of their largest non-people expenses on their revenue and expense statement. Next slide, please. In terms of greenhouse gas footprint, the impact of these large-scale solutions can be very dramatic. This is a real example from George Washington University. The top line on this chart is basically mapping out between 2010 and 2040 over time their expected total greenhouse gas footprint. You can see the blue wedge is what they expect to receive over time from building energy efficiency. There's a couple of other very thin slides related to transportation improvements as well as on-campus renewables. As an urban university, GW has a very small footprint, and therefore it doesn't have, even if you covered the entire campus with solar panels, it would only have a small impact on their footprint. The 50% offsite renewable solution that they adopted and went commercial in 2014 has had a very dramatic impact on their greenhouse gas footprint, and ultimately for them, help them achieve their 2025 greenhouse gas reduction goal, which is the horizontal dashed line across this page, 10 years early in 2016 relative to their expected goal in 2025. Next slide. And then lastly, in terms of other benefits, there's a number of different opportunities that certainly we've seen many of our clients talk about publicly that relate to their leadership, how they're perceived by all their stakeholders, including alumni, branding and marketing opportunities, joint research opportunities. Two of our clients, both MIT and George Washington University, have both launched joint research efforts with the developer owner of the projects, their offsite projects. And then lastly, community involvement as you consider possibly aggregating your load with others, which, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, MIT did with both Boston Medical Center as well as Post Office Square Development Corp. Next slide. That brings us to our second polling question today. Has your organization already considered offsite renewables? Again, we'll give you a few seconds here to vote, if you would, please. Here's the results. Looks like about, almost half have actually looked into it a little bit, followed by just short of a quarter, not at all. Some are unsure, which may reflect the fact that someone else in their organization may be looking at it, and then about 12% have actually explored it in depth. So thank you for those responses. And again, if we could turn back to the slides. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to shift from a description of the opportunity to the spectrum of options. The good news is as the market has developed over the last half dozen years, that's actually creating more and different ways to get involved in the game. Next slide. This is just the landscape of options that we prepared and have used to help communicate to different folks considering this, what opportunities they have. You can see in the horizontal axis the contract term length in terms of years from 1 year to 25 years, and on the vertical axis, the expected net present value savings over the life of the contract. What we can say here is that the market, when it really started going, and we got started 7 years ago, really was in the green bubble, which was long-term contracts in the 12 to 25-year range, a number of different structural variations, some of them physical contracts that were integrated, some more indirect, particularly for those who live in regulated states, and then also something called a virtual PPA, which is more of a financial contract and is a little bit easier contract to structure, but one that doesn't have quite as many levers to pull over time to optimize the asset. There are other options, though, that, as you can see, have cropped up over time as wholesale energy traders have gotten involved in the market over the last 3 to 4 years. We're seeing other structured wholesale utility products that offer the opportunity for a shorter-term product on the order of 5 to 15 year term, but as you can see, a little bit lower savings over the course of the contract. And also, as the yellow bubble shows, there are now some large-scale solutions, both wind and solar, that are coming off their let's say they may have had a 5 or 10 or 15 year original PPA contract term that are now becoming available in the market and may be available to be contracted for through competitive bidding and create a shorter contract term for the purchaser. We compare all of these bubbles with, as you can see in the lower left-hand corner, grid power plus RECs, which is really historically what folks have seen available in the market. That's just continuing to purchase grid power from your utility or local provider and purchase RECs on top of it. The two together, of course, is a higher cost option and doesn't provide savings, whereas the other ones on the game board here, if you will, all provide potential savings opportunity over time. There are a number of other considerations to think about beyond just what's in the bubble. Do you want to own or have a third party finance it through a power purchase agreement, on-site, off-site, or both? Technologies, how much of your load do you want covered by renewable energy, and so on. Next slide. Let me dig into some of these examples just to give you a little bit more sense for what they feel like and look like. The first one I'll just quickly talk about is Michigan State University's integrated on-site large-scale solution. In their case, they're a land-grant university, have a lot of property, and after exploring a number of options, both on-site and off-site, decided for their first project to actually go on-site and decided to do it over a number of parking lots that they have spread around the campus. This, of course, is a land-grant university, a lot of parking lots, and they were able to amass across multiple parking lots over 10 megawatts of carport solar. They're very excited about the solution. They actually just broke ground on it last week, and so it's actually will be constructed on campus between now and the end of the year. This is sort of their first big down payment towards their public goal of going to 100% renewables, and that's from a university that actually has the largest on-site natural gas-fired cogeneration plant of any university in the country. Next slide. The next one is an integrated off-site solution. Tim mentioned earlier GW, George Washington University. They actually work together with American University and the George Washington University Hospital, which is actually, although it has the same GW name, is owned by a separate hospital management company. They aggregated their load together to secure a 54 megawatt off-site solar project within the same regional network that they're located, in their case PJM. The solution's located in Northeast North Carolina. Basically, we aggregated 50% of the load for each of the 3 buyers, and we're working together to optimize the integration of the renewable production in North Carolina with their remaining on-site campus needs in a way that's optimizing the two together and reducing both their brown power, grid power cost, as well as the benefits of the renewable solution as well. Next slide. Next example is what we call an indirect offsite solution. This is available, by the way, for both those on the phone who are in deregulated markets, as well as ones that are located in regulated markets. In this case, 3 purchasers in New England, in the Boston area. MIT, you can see on this chart, was the flagship customer for this solution. Decided to enter into an agreement for an offsite power purchase agreement for 60 megawatts of solar, in their case located in North Carolina. This was after a very competitive process where they received over 40 bids. A number of them were actually within New England, but for economic and other reasons, they decided to go outside of region for their solution. This solution actually is going to be up and running commercially operational within the next week. They've already begun receiving power about it. They're very excited about it. And as Joe Higgins, the head of facilities at MIT, marvels at, the size of this solar solution, as you can see in the lower left-hand corner, is actually equal to about 4 MIT campuses and represents about 40% of their off-site grid power purchasers. Next slide. And the last example we wanted to show on, which actually builds on the prior one, is aggregated off-site solutions. So here again, this is the MIT solution, but as you can see, 2 other purchasers were also involved in this one, neither of which were directly related to the university. One is Boston Medical Center, a large nonprofit healthcare center within Boston. The other, Post Office Square Development Corp., which is actually a park and an underground parking garage, if you know downtown Boston, has a very small load and actually has the distinction of not only getting just 1% of the total output of the 60 megawatts of solar, but they now have rights to say they have the smallest power purchase agreement for any large-scale solution in the country. Again, all 3 purchasers are very excited about the solution going commercial next week. None of them put capital into it, and they will continue receiving power from their local provider off the grid, while effectively receiving separately the benefits of the offsite solution. Next slide. Let me now turn then from the spectrum of options available, and hopefully we gave you a feel. This is not a one-size-fits-all game. This is really about thinking hard about your options and using fact-based analysis to tailor it for the best fit and the best economics for your campus. We'll now talk a little bit more about aggregation, which we already touched on the next slide. This, as Tim talked about earlier, is something that I think both Second Nature and we are increasingly more and more excited about, and why we're increasingly working together to help make this happen in the higher ed segment. The facts of the case are that scale actually does matter in terms of the economics of solution. If folks on your campus look before at small-scale on-site or small-scale off-site solutions, they may have concluded that the economics just don't work. We're happy to say that in virtually every case we look at now, if structured and procured well for large scale, the economics do work and can save money for virtually any institution or purchaser from day one. Of course, different schools have different goals and frameworks, but we've now in multiple cases found ways to work around them and align leadership interests in a way that that really brings to bear the value proposition we talked about before in a very compelling way, and aggregation can be a very major step or building block in your pathway to carbon neutrality. Next slide. And just beyond some of the facts and figures, there's many other benefits to considering aggregating with others, whether again it's higher ed or just other organizations that you have close relationships with. Of course, it allows folks with smaller loads to benefit, increases your bargaining power, allows you to spread costs over multiple purchasers. You can do joint PR outreach, which actually helps amplify the message in the market. Many of the aggregated projects we've seen and been involved with have really received very strong following, both in news organizations as well as through alumni networks, as well as on campus. And also there's just the benefit of working together. Sort of the notion of we're in this together is something that can be very reinforcing to everyone involved. And I think anyone who's been involved in these would tell you by working with others was a huge benefit for them in moving their organization along. Next slide. So our last polling question for you is there a sense of urgency in your institution to pursue renewables? So again, we'll give you a few seconds and would appreciate your answer. And if we could see the results, please. Looks like just over half. There's some motivation, but not urgent, which means it may have not yet arisen to the top of the priority list. About 20% believe that there is a sense of urgency, and so clearly are looking for opportunities to pursue this. About 12% not really, and then 8% unsure. So I think what that largely means is that there may be at least an open door to talk more about it for probably almost 3/4 of you, and walking through the door with facts may help move things forward. So with that, let's turn to the last agenda item, next slide, which is next steps and tools to explore large-scale renewables. So this is just a summary of how you might think about your pathway towards large-scale renewables as you continue exploring it. And we call it a journey here, as you can see. The first on the left side of this chart is really just to get your mind around your energy baseline, what your goals are, and effectively what your launching point is for viewing this potential opportunity. In the middle two boxes, you can then see there's actually a number of different external resources that you can avail yourselves of, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. Of course, that includes Second Nature, ASHE, the Business Renewable Council, EPA, WWF, and others. And of course, there's professional advisors like our company as well as others that you can also speak to. Part of it then needs to turn to building internal understanding and buy-in, and so understanding who the internal stakeholders are that need to know more about this, and really kind of working the halls and talking to the right people and sharing facts and figures with them. Generally, we found helps build awareness, understanding, and excitement. On the right side of this chart then finally is really trying to dimensionalize and starting to dimensionalize what the value proposition can look like for your organization, and then finally embarking on an objective, transparent, fact-based process that leads your organization to potentially very positive outcomes. Next slide. There are, full disclosure, there are of course some challenges, as you probably imagine. This is a little bit outside the realm of what most organizations have done historically, and we've just numbered here 6 different challenges that many organizations normally need to hurdle or jump over in going through the process. The good news is many have gone before you. There's a lot of lessons learned, and again, this is the kind of these hurdles are the kind of things that CFR and other advisors will help you overcome during the course of the process. Next slide. We've also developed really largely for the higher ed community an online calculator to assess your cost and greenhouse gas savings potential with large-scale offsite solutions. We call it the offsite LSRE value calculator. It's actually available at the website address you can see here on the chart, lsre-tool.customerfirstrenewables.com. And it's something you can play with at your leisure. There's a number of different opportunities to do what-ifs with this, test different technologies, test different size projects, and effectively start informing some of the numbers that might help inform the case that you can take forward internally within your organization. You are able on this site, by the way, to also print out the results and use that as part of supporting your discussions internally. Last slide, please. And just to summarize key takeaways, really there's a lot of options, and it's really up to you and your organization to explore them and find which ones work for you. There's a very recent white paper that was co-authored by Second Nature and our company that is available online, and we would encourage you to take a look at it. It'll give you a little bit more in-depth view on the opportunity. Also, beyond that, we'd encourage you to really start thinking through what does it take to really define what success looks like for your organization. How do you get folks to get more involved in the discussion, build a buy-in, understand what the value proposition looks like, start thinking about how you can syndicate the opportunity with broader folks on campus, and then ultimately embark on your journey. Next slide. And with that, we're going to wrap up here and open the floor to questions.
Thanks so much, Gary and Tim, and thanks to everybody for submitting some questions. We'll only have a chance to get through a couple of them, but please know that we have all of the questions that came in, and we'll reach back out to you directly to answer them if we don't get to your questions. This came in a couple of different ways, but how's the best way to engage in renewables if there aren't any strong incentives and drivers in states with modest electricity rates?
Michelle, would you like me to take that question?
Yeah, I think, Gary, that's you.
Great. So we oftentimes hear that my state is regulated, my state doesn't have incentives, there's no way I can make this work economically on-site or off-site. As it turns out, generally that's not true. Once you kind of understand the broader landscape of options, generally we encourage clients to cast the net wide, which means look in depth at what is possible on-site and within state, but while doing that, also look for what's available on their grid, both within their region as well as outside their region. And we've always found through opening the aperture up to the broad set of options, it not only informs better decisions for most clients and frankly more confidence in moving forward, but also gives them a better sense for the lay of the land, where the economics are best, and then they can make trade-off decisions whether they'd like to do it close to home versus doing it off-site, but in a more fundamental and more economic way.
Great, thanks. And I think, Tim, you and Gary can both probably speak to this next one. And Gary, I think you alluded to it, and we've seen through the polling results that these conversations are indeed happening on campus and to varying degrees. But what are some of the best approaches that you would recommend to start to have these kinds of conversations on campus, to think in a long-term and strategic way?
I could take the first little stab at that. I mean, with large-scale projects, oftentimes there is this intimidation factor, and sometimes your colleagues at other institutions, if the internal capacity isn't quite there yet, can be really great resources for you. So many of you are part of regional networks or affinity groups across the country that clearly you can draw on to ask these sorts of questions. And then, obviously, if you're part of the Climate Leadership Network, this is something we're directly interested in helping to facilitate. And so there are some areas of the country and different types of institutions that are really well positioned. And over the upcoming year, that's, like I was saying at the beginning, an area that we're going to be pushing into for you. And obviously reaching out to us directly would be one way to help facilitate that conversation. If you're not sure about your own campus, we can easily connect you with folks, whether it's in your own region or your own type of school, that can have that conversation with you and ultimately get a project going. I don't know, Gary, if you have any other thoughts based on your experience.
No, I think that's all right, Tim. I would just add that, you know, really kind of getting the facts on the table early on tends to help. And I think the calculator that we talked about earlier, you know, contacting us or organizations like us to get more of a bird's eye view on what the value proposition can look like, how to start dimensionalizing it for your organization, I think helps then you lead a discussion within your own organization on, gee, this is compelling. It may not be at the top of the priority list yet, but it's something we should be considering. And in fact, it may be something that can actually help us from both an economic as well as a risk management standpoint, as well as moving the needle on greenhouse gas.
And one last thing, I guess, there, Gary, is that while this is very operations focused, I think your point about how MIT and GW included these curricular components and research components into their projects is something that's utterly unique with higher ed. You know, we're not Google necessarily, and we're going to do this huge offsite project that doesn't, we don't care we don't have students that are engaged with it, you know. And so in the case of higher ed, you do in fact have maybe a constituency that you just are not really sure how to engage with the projects you're working on as either a facilities person or a sustainability officer. And these projects can actually be a great way to do it.
I think that's absolutely true, Tim. And I'd say, you know, we've worked with many developers across the country. They're very open to these sort of things and excited about them as well. And so GW and MIT both decided to make it an explicit part of their agreement, and certainly the developer/project owners were very open to and excited about doing it.
Okay, just one last question, Gary. I think this one's for you before we wrap up. Have you had experience in working with campuses that have gone through a community solar program to meet their goals? What was that experience like, or the lessons learned?
We have looked as part of multiple projects, community solar projects, and in some cases there are opportunities to do it. Part of the benefit of them is that they are off-site but provide some additional savings opportunity through net metering practices. They basically get a credit for not just the energy component but also the distribution component of their bill by the local utility. The challenge, of course, is that in most parts of the country, it's very difficult to get large-scale solutions that can really move the needle at a level that's really compelling for the purchaser. And so they tend to be somewhat limited by scale of size, therefore economics as well. And it's something that, you know, we will continue including in every procurement we do. If the opportunities are there, we'll help the client capture them. But to date, I think it's been difficult to get ones that really ring the bell for the purchasers we've worked with.
Okay. We are just about out of time. I want to remind everybody that we will send you the slides after the webinar and post the recording on our website. Thank you to you all, and I want to emphasize something that Tim mentioned. If you all are interested in learning how to find an aggregation partner and trying to get this started on your campus and with your community, please do send us a message. We're going to be working on this with CustomerFirst and others throughout the year. It's going to be a real focus of ours. So let us know if you need assistance, and we look forward to working with you. And thanks, as always, for your leadership. Have a good day.